I want to jump right into some questions, and what you just read, Roxana, spurred a question that I have about our own shifting identity in relationship to family. The fact that we are a daughter to our fathers, or a mother's a sister, a niece, a mother, and how it's more than just a label that we have. It actually moves us, I think, in time as well when we encounter these people at different points in our life. And I wonder about that in your writing, and I wonder about the attempt to bring together the whole human being within all these shifting identities through your writing. I know it's a kind of general question, but maybe could you start with that?
One of the things that drove this book was that I was interested in, there was a problem that seemed to keep recurring, and I was interested in the fact that as an adult, it seems, even if you think of yourself as a good adult, you still can find yourself being a bad child. And that no matter how old you are, it seems that you can open your mouth and you hear suddenly the voice of a whiny, needy 6-year-old, or a resentful adolescent, or a superior 21-year-old, and you think, what am I saying? I wouldn't talk like this to a friend, but apparently I would talk like this to my parents. No matter how old I am, no matter how responsible I am as a member of the community, I suddenly turn into a child I want nothing to do with. And I thought that was a really interesting problem as a human being. And I wanted to explore that, and I can report to you at the end of the book, I found that, as far as I know, there is no cure for this condition. That we just find ourselves as, we will always be the children of our parents, and it's frustrating for them, because one of the things I wanted to explore in the book was what it's like for those older parents who were in their 80s, who discover that they're losing their grip on the world. The mother is losing her memory. The father, who has been a neurosurgeon, is losing, his hands become clumsier and clumsier with age. His physical machinery works less well, and it's frightening for them. But because their daughter is so invested in proving to them that she's a grown-up, she doesn't hear them asking for sympathy or the kind of help that it would be most useful for them to receive. But they're locked into these roles, and it's hard for them, who've always felt that they needed to support her, it's hard for them to ask support from her, and it's hard for her to hear that they need it. And then in the third generation, it turns out that her son is a heroin addict, which throws all of their roles into greater confusion, and they have to struggle into new positions. But that situation of being a child, it doesn't ever change. So I think it's incredibly rich, and as I say, I didn't discover a cure.
Stefan, that reminds me of the concept that underlies your work of retrogenesis, and the sense that, is that actually, that's a term in Alzheimer's and dementia, retrogenesis. You just talked about a little, Roxana, the idea of the parent becoming a child again, and is there some shift, is there some crossing point? Do you want to address that idea a little?
My first book, The Story of Forgetting, dealt with Alzheimer's disease. I was homeschooled, my mother homeschooled me, and for a time, my grandmother came to live with us. And about a year before she moved in with us, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Scientists have this term, retrogenesis, to describe the course of the disease. It means a return to origin. And the idea is that Alzheimer's undoes your selfhood in the opposite direction of how it was first constructed. So the things that we gain last go first, manners or reading ability, eloquence, and then eventually, the disease returns you all the way to, with this modern state of medicine, to a fetus state. You're attached to tubes, and your heart doesn't really beat on its own anymore. A lot of people think of Alzheimer's as just a memory loss disease, but it, in fact, is just just eats its way through your brain. I mean, often the sufferers die of a secondary disease first. But one of the interesting parts of my experience with my grandmother, it was just the three of us in the house. I have a very close relationship with my mother, but my grandmother, I had seen she was the archetype of maternal, doting grandmother, and she was a great caretaker to me when I was younger. But as the disease progressed, she became more and more sort of adolescent. She would become irrational. And at a certain point, I was 12 years old. She was neurologically essentially 12 years old. And we became great friends in this way. And maybe this is the only way in which the roles can shift a little bit, because she had no memory of raising my mother. And we would just go on these sort of silly adventures. We would hang out in my fort in the creek and stuff. I mean, this old lady. And I was so, I was homeschooled, so I didn't have that many friends, so I was really grateful to have a friend my age. But then, of course, it progressed further, and it became a very sad thing. So.
Well, one of the things that you picked up on in what Dawn said was this idea, and I wonder if, Dawn, you want to talk about that a little bit, this idea that the people who we don't know in our families, or we knew very briefly, have an immense influence on who we are as human beings, and also on the story that our families are constantly constructing and deconstructing as we live. And I wonder if you, and Nami also, if you have thoughts about that, and how that filters into your writing.
Yeah, I think we are very heavily influenced by things that we don't know ever occurred. My novel was called Carrying the Body, and by that I really meant a body of knowledge and feeling that passes through different generations. And as it happened, that story about the great aunt that was actually told to me as a real story, and I heard it at my great aunt's funeral. I had never heard it before. The dates actually don't make sense, so I'm not even sure it's true, but it's a story that's kind of been carried and modified, and I wanted to look at how to frame it and how we twist that even further, because I'm trying to tell it to somebody else, but I'm interrupted, and so in every telling, it also gets warped by whatever my own drama and my own interpretation is, and we pass it along, but we start turning it into something else as we go forward too.
Do you have any thoughts?
I'm so happy not speaking, and I like listening more. You guys have really interesting things to say. I mean, I think my idea of family is, how do I say it? To me, family is not unlike days of war, where on Sundays you have explosions, and then there are other days where you're just sitting around playing cards and watching movies, waiting for the explosion. I come from a very visibly fractured family. I think there are families that you can't see from the outside that they're fractured, but they are too. I come from a visibly fractured family, and my family comes from a visibly fractured country. And so it's not a surprise to me that my novel is very fragmented and it's very sort of sharp and minimalist in many ways. But I think that families only see just a fraction of our wholeness. Like there's no one family member who can see us as a whole. That's my perspective. And that's really the same thing with life, everywhere else, other groups of people as well. That's the great thing about fiction, is that in fiction we get something that we don't get in real life, which is a complete whole picture of one character, how they sort of move around in different settings and different situations. And I think that's what makes fiction so fulfilling for me, is you never get that in real life. Even your best partner doesn't see you in every situation, or see you when you're being alone, which is what fiction allows you to do, is you can see a character being absolutely alone and not interacting. I don't know what I was talking about, but basically, I think who we are in front of family is, for me, it just doesn't seem like you fall into those roles because it's so easy. Because that's the role, that's the one area that your mom or your dad, knows about you. And so why try to introduce them to other parts of yourself? It's just so much work. And I also wanted to sort of talk about, you were saying how, Roxana, you were saying how the world, family is like your first world, and then you grow up. I share that sentiment. I feel that if you even have like a modicum of understanding of your family, that maybe you'll have a chance of making it out into the world, out in the real world. But I don't mean to say that the family is a smaller version of the world or a slice of the world. More that it's actually just a compression, like whatever the world is, you can compress it, and that is your family.
It's a great image.
And like all the atoms of the world are still there. It's just tensely and densely packed inside your mother.
I think that's a wonderful image, and a wonderful image for the importance of writing about family in general and its central place in literature, that it is this compression of everything that exists in the world. I know we're running out of time, so I want to thank you all for coming so early in the morning and being part of this panel. Thank you.